Well, my name is Michael Anaya Gorman. I was known as AG at VVS. I was class of 2002, and I'm from Gallup, New Mexico. My mom was an alumni of VVS, and so as I grew up with her and I was getting closer to high school age, she started suggesting, hey, why don't you go to VVS, look at it. It's a great school. She had a great experience, and I started looking closer at it and decided that it was something that was appealed to me in its rural setting, its outdoor area, its focus on the anthropology, and focus specifically on the arts. I kind of went because it had a big performing arts program, which is something I wanted to do and something I haven't touched since high school, actually. But well, VVS is when I think Ham and Barbara Warren were very smart with the way that they formulated it. They were aiming for a group of students that were too young to have their minds set for life, but old enough to think critically about a lot of things. Well, I was 13 when I went, and it's a very formative time for young men, for young women. You're going through a lot of changes physically, mentally, emotionally, and suddenly you're separated from the mainstream. You're separated from your family. And as a native student, I was separated a lot from my culture, but also brought very close to it in a lot of ways, in the rural settings, in the outside of mainstream. Because growing up on the reservation, there's this duality of American and Native American. There's an urban culture and then there's a native culture, and they blend and they overlap, and there's a lot of searching for identity in that. And I think a lot of Native youth find it in basketball, they find it in gangs, they find it in Native culture, they find it in Western culture, and it's a little bit of a gamble onto which side you land on. VVS at that time in my life opened a lot of doorways to other Native cultures, the other Native students that were there, other world students that were there. I took French my freshman year, almost failed out of it, but it was interesting learning not just the French language, but the cultural studies that went along with it, on how the French have a guarded society or school that guards the French language against foreign influence, and just seeing that against the Western world or the English-speaking world, and then Native culture against the Western world. I drew a lot of parallels. And so the education there, not just in the classroom, but in the experiences of 4 years going through puberty there, first girlfriend, first love of my life, like what was there at that time, and the heartbreak was there, and a lot of first experiences. It's an interesting thing, I think, as a young man to experience that on your own, with your peers, and to have a different sort of family dynamic going on at the time. So I mean, to get back to the question, how did VVS influence? It was a very big part of my life, and it was a very big time in my life. And in VVS, I was glad I was there for that, and to experience the travel and the culture and the opportunities I think that I never would have experienced otherwise. Field trips. The field trips were, I think, the funnest part of my VVS experience that I can talk about on camera. My freshman year, I did the Grand Canyon. We went down to Havasupai, and we did 2 weeks. We did 118 miles, which at the time was the record. I don't know if it's been since broken. But we had Pam and her husband Tim take us out on a trek for that whole 2 weeks. It ruined a Snickers bar for me. I've never had a Snickers bar ever taste the same. And I recently did the Grand Canyon again, did the Havasupai trip, and there's a big difference between doing it when you're 14 and doing it when you're 32. It was a lot harder this time, but it was just as fun. My sophomore year, I was really into ceramics, and I went with Jeff Perkins down to Mato Ortiz. We did the Mato Ortiz trip with the ceramics. We spent a couple days in Agua Prieta working with an orphanage. That was incredible. My junior year, that was the field trip that was a little more interesting. We went to Isla Tiburon to work with the Seri Indians on wood carving, and nothing that whole trip actually worked out the way it was supposed to, but it was an adventure nonetheless. It was interesting. And my senior year was the next big international trip. We did a trip to Germany, to Bad Honnef, Germany, and spent some time in Berlin, Bad Honnef, Cologne, and Frankfurt. And that was really cool. I mean, Jeff Perkins, my ceramics and my photography teacher, was a huge influence on, I think, where I've ended up today. I've continued ceramics, I've continued photography, developed them as skills. They were really fantastic. Seth Norbick, who came in top project period, I worked with him for 2 weeks, I think for 2 years, and you know, I've actually had people comment on how well I learned those silversmithing tools. Here in Santa Fe, I've had people call me up and ask for help in, you know, production silversmithing, not necessarily my own design, but I mean, those are skills I learned 17 years ago and still are using today. I mean, you know, and just that 2 weeks, you know, he was so dedicated, not just to his craft, but to teaching it in a project period, just a very intense, short time to learn a lot, you know, and so to actually keep that skill set for so long was really, really amazing. I mean, Robin, my freshman English teacher, failed me my first, what do they call it? Not the semester, but the first quarter. I failed freshman English. I mean, because I came there thinking I could write an essay, and she's like, "This is a book report, and it's not even a good one. So let's talk about how to write an essay." You know, Judge Mason helped me with my analytical skills. John Griffiths helped me so much with my logic, and again with the writing. I mean, all of the teachers were just amazingly influential. Like I said, I fell in love with the first time at VVS. I mean, you know, that was a huge part of my life. You know, and fell out of love. I mean, that was another big part that went on there. Biggest influence, though, I mean, I would say it helped me step out of my shell. I came from the reservations, the reservation of the Navajo Nation to VVS, and I had a lot of realizations about the world, about myself, about things that I thought were one way that it turned out could be, you know, another way, or 10 different ways. Music was a big influence at the time, and you know, I think VVS gets stuck in like this 1960s, 1970s sort of, you know, pre-Vietnam, during Vietnam, post-Vietnam era of music of, you know, Bob Marley, Charlie Daniels, Jackson Brown, who was still doing the concerts then, you know, Crosby, Stills and Nash. I mean, so there's a whole sort of fix there where, like, if you go to a high school in, like, you know, downtown Albuquerque, you're going to have, you know, Nicki Minaj, or I mean, that's probably even like 5-6 years old now, but whoever like the pop artist is now is going to be the big influence, and I think kind of getting removed from time, going to that time capsule is a big influence, you know, and experiencing almost through a different generation's eyes the world as it exists now is an interesting thing to go through. You know, I loved going up to the barns, just checking out the horses, you know, taking them out for a ride. I mean, probably the place I spent the most time on campus. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, Death Trail. If you can still run Death Trail at night without a flashlight, you're a VVSer. I mean, the barns were probably one of my big escapes. I'd go up to Cowpie and just kind of like I'd like to kind of sit and quietly listen. So I'd sometimes just sit on the top of Cowpie, and the sounds from the campus, you could hear people's conversations just travel up the hill. And you wouldn't hear the details of it, but you'd hear the voices. And so just going up there on a quiet day by yourself was always just kind of fun. Just, you know, hearing all the stuff going on around you was a good place to go on campus.
Cool.
I don't know if I would. I mean, I might just kind of, it might be kind of cool to see myself from a distance, like just ready to go down that journey and kind of just get a glimpse into the past. But I mean, everything that happened going into that experience had its own outcome, and I think to change any one thing or to offer myself any advice, I might try to steer it one way or steer it another way. I think the whole thing about VVS is the philosophy. You have to be open to what's there. You have to be ready to try things that make you uncomfortable, and you have to be willing to see them through. And you have to know when to, if it's too far out, you have to know when to say no, because a big part of it is the freedom that you're given to govern yourself and make your own decisions. And so I think if I were to give myself any advice, it might take away from that, because I'd get tunnel visioned on something, and it'd take away from another opportunity that I might have had. I don't know if I give myself any advice, but to any VVSer that's going to start, be open to whatever's in front of you, and just be ready to take in the experience. You might not appreciate it now, or even in 5 years, but in 10, 15 years, you're going to look back at that and say, that was an experience that I had.